Okay, so we're about 1 minute past here. People might keep flooding in, and that's good, and we'll welcome them when they do. But we'll go ahead and get started with today's session with my spiritual director, Sue Garthwaite, and I'm Kate Williams. I'm the senior managing editor at GIA, and I'm very grateful that Sue is joining us again. The last time we were all together was one of people's favorite sessions because I think we don't do this enough. And I think people don't realize that spiritual direction is something that is available to all of us. And finding a good spiritual director for me has been just paramount in my ability to process all that it means to be a minister and to follow this vocation that I feel called to. So just a quick note here for everybody. You can keep chatting in the chat box throughout. And I'll keep watching that, and if there's something that comes up that might be appropriate for us to address in the hour, then I'll be sure to catch that. If you have a specific question for me or for Sue, go ahead and look at the bottom of your panel here. If you're on a desktop, anyway, I learned there's a difference between signing in on your desktop and signing in on your mobile device, your iPad or your phone. I think it might be on the top then. But anyway, down at the bar, there's a Q&A feature, so you can click on that. It'll open a Q&A window. And if you think of any specific questions that you want to make sure that I see, go ahead and type them in there, and I'll do my best to get to all of them. Today's session, I'm also supposed to remind you to sign up for the rest of the webinars this week, which have been advertised on our Facebook page. All of these webinars are free. And I encourage you to take advantage of all of them. Tomorrow's webinar at 1 p.m. Central is going to be with Bishop Mark Seitz, who of course was recently made a lot of news headlines because there was that beautiful image of him in a mask, kneeling on the grass with a big sign that said Black Lives Matter. So he's going to talk to us tomorrow a little bit about what it means to be a follower of the gospel in terms of risk-taking. We don't get to decide to opt out of the risks if we would like to follow in the way of Jesus. So I'm looking forward to that one too. But today's topic is also a good one and a tough one. And I've given Sue a little bit of a heads up that there might be some ugly crying involved today because there is just so much weight on my shoulders, on everybody's shoulders. And I don't want to dismiss that. I want to feel it and talk about it and name it. So that's why we call today's session a spirituality in its season of uncomfortable truths. So just while we were gathering today, I started making a list of all the things that have happened since the last time we talked, Sue. The last time we talked, it was prior to the murder of George Floyd. The last time we talked was prior to a lot of our summer conventions and vacations and educational opportunities being canceled or converted to virtual opportunities. We've learned a lot more about the science behind COVID-19 since the last time we talked. Some of it really, really scary. Since the last time we talked, we've also learned these just excruciating truths about victimization at the hands of one of the composers of GIA, and likely more. And I do want to talk about that. And I don't want to give off the impression that this is just a one-off, one person who struggles with obviously a lot, mental health and addiction included, but this is also about a system that allowed that to happen. And I think what I'm seeing out of a lot of that is both, I think, this renewed Black Lives Matter movement and also this kind of wave of the Me Too movement in the liturgical music world. I'm seeing a lot of differences in the way that generationally, and this is, like I said, an over exaggeration or an overgeneralization type of a statement, but there's a difference generationally in the way that we're responding to these topics, and that's another layer of what makes, I think, what makes this a particularly uncomfortable time. So if we could just solve all those problems in the next 55 minutes. Okay. You're up for it?
Well, I think one of the things that strikes me is the topic of truth, right? And how Jesus says the truth shall make you free. And I would say in my generation, the generation before me, and the one before that, a lot of things were kept quiet, not out in the open. And I know my experience as a younger person was in bringing things up sometimes, it created massive shutdown around me. You know, people who didn't want to talk about the truth or didn't want to admit that something was true and wanted things to be, you know, kept quiet or kept out of the public eye or things like that. But truth is always God's starting point, right? That's where God begins, is bringing out the truth. That's what Jesus says, I'm the truth. I'm the truth, right? And so, and look at the reaction to him, you know. He tells the truth, and he's about the truth, and that's the beginning. And Teresa of Avila has this great line that the truth will suffer. The truth will suffer, but it will never perish. Mm. It's never going to perish. It's always going to be there somewhere. And so she's always praying that God will make it more and more known. And I think that's where we are right now is we can either pray that the dust settles and things are going to go back to the way they were. I hear people say that a lot. I want things to get back to normal. Well, it's not normal for the truth to be hidden, right? And it would be a mistake for us to go back to the way things were, you know, such that the truth was more hidden. It needs to be brought out more and more, and evil exposed. But also, I think God has a tendency not just to bring out the truth, especially the truth about evil, but the truth about good. And so spiritually, we have to keep trying for that balance of noticing the good, even if that good is truth coming out. You know, we have to see that as a good, as uncomfortable and challenging as it is, to see that as a good and be grateful that the truth actually doesn't perish.
Yeah, you know, I just, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, you said that there are people who just, you know, kind of want the dust to settle. And what immediately came to my mind is Ash Wednesday, when we take dust and call it holy and put it in a place where everybody can see.
Yes. Right.
I remember once in kids choir at St. Nick's, I always like to, you know, when we approach a new season, ask the kids about the things that they see and what they think that means. So we used to take like tours around the church and stuff, and like talk about the stained glass windows and the statues and the the books and the little side chapels and stuff. And I remember one year for Ash Wednesday, I asked him, like, they all know that you put dust on your head and make a cross, and it's the beginning of Lent. But I asked him, like, why do you think we do that? Why do we put a bunch of dirt on our head? And this one brilliant little girl said, because ashes are what's left when the light goes out.
Wow.
Yeah, I think about that now every year on Ash Wednesday.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
and as you're talking again, I'm remembering it. And I think, like, I'm feeling like, yeah, I don't want the dust to settle again, because we've seen the dust settle before.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It comes back. It's still, it still covers.
Somehow have a different feeling right now about where it's all going, because at least as I talk to my directees, more of whom are white than anything else, I begin to understand this line from this old book, The Imitation of Christ, right? I mean, there's a spiritual classic that is not very popular, but the line that came to mind is we cannot trust our own virtue. And I think white people are starting to get that now, that we cannot trust that we are not racist. However sincere we might be, we can't trust that, because now we're more aware of how systemic it is. We're more aware of how we've bathed in it. And we do things and say things that are racist without ever intending to be racist, but it's there, almost as part of our makeup because of growing up in it, right? And so I think finally white people are beginning to understand that that's the truth, that we have a lot of humility to embrace here, because we can't trust that we aren't racist. We can't trust that we're virtuous in this, and that we have nothing to learn, right? And that it's just about solidarity. Well, it's more than that. It's more complex than that. It's deeper than that, way deeper, where, I may offend an African American who's my friend inadvertently because of what I have bathed in and learned growing up as a white person.
Yeah. That is a huge lesson. And I think almost especially for communities that are mostly white, often, that see themselves as being progressive, I think they're sometimes the ones who are the most trusting of their virtue. Like, I like to think about myself like that too. Like, I loved that about St. Nick's. Like, I loved identifying as a part of a progressive community. But, you and I both know the ways that was not a virtue to be trusted. Like, that we were just as complicit in all the things that we condemned as anybody else. And I still love St. Nick's. I think they're doing a lot of things right. I learned a lot. I was shaped a lot by a community of St. Nick's. But me personally, I was at St. Nick's, actually, when the first time somebody called me racist. And I was so offended. I was like, what are you talking about? I've never done anything harmful to person of color, I have lots of friends who are people of color. I'm a part of St. Nick's, for crying out loud. Like, St. Nick's is a diverse place to be. And I was offended, and I confided that in David Philippart at the time when we were working together. I was like, can you believe she called me a racist? Like, I can't believe this. And he, looked at me and in the most loving way possible said, well, you are. I was like, what are you talking about? I said, no, you're, he said, Kate, I'm a racist. You're a racist. Like, we are white people, and our perspective is white. And that is a racist way, like, the way you see the world is white. And it's
what we think is normal, right?
Yeah.
Comes out of the system. It's
I was mad at him for saying that. Like, oh my God, you're not relating to what's happening. But like years later, I got it. I got it. I mean, I don't get it, but I got it at least to say, oh, I'm racist. And it doesn't take me being actively racist, actively seeking out harm or, discounting voices of people of color. It really helped me to read the books about anti-racism, to be actively anti-racist. And I know that you probably can be a white person who's racist and actively anti-racist at the same time if you're being your best self,
Yeah, it's kind of like the wounded healer concept, right? Is that we're racist and yet we're trying to work against racism at the same time. But I think also we're waking up to the fact that, we have to come to that point where we are very active in the idea that we're not cooperating with it. Yeah. Not giving it any of our cooperation, and that ceasing to enable it may be bolder and harder than we think, and that it takes a lot more self-work than we thought. Right.
Yeah, there's a question here. It's obvious that the facilitators are white. Is this an artifact of white supremacy in the Catholic Church? If so, how about some first steps to change this sometime inadvertent racism? I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, I do too.
And I also think that there's an instinct, even in me, to want to say, well, but not all of our facilitators have been white on these webinars, and I'm trying to name it at least, and do that self-examine look. But that's kind of the defensive, I think, racist part of me.
Yeah.
The truth is, that's a valid question. I think it's a valid observation.
It's part of the uncomfortable. That's our theme, right? Is it, ooh, I'm uncomfortable. That's probably good.
Yeah, I think it is. And it hurts. It hurts to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I try to keep perspective that, like, what else hurts is, like, 400 years of being dismissed as a lesser than, being. I can't know what that kind of hurt is like. Right. I don't carry that pain and weight in my DNA the way I carry some other types of pain and hurt, and they're not equal, and I will never know what that is felt like or feels like. And I have to be okay with that truth. I mean, I have to be okay with admitting that truth, I think. Yeah. It hurts. Hurts to be called out on it.
Yeah. But that's a good kind of pain.
I think
It's a good
so.
kind of pain in the sense that it is about truth. It is really revealing of what the situation is, and also what our growing edge is, what we need to think about in terms of change and so on. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's other type of pain that I carry, um, and just being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know these things are not equivalent, but like some of what's been happening in the church's recent revelations of sexism and misuse of power, I try to make a similar kind of argument, I guess, about when my male colleagues are not understanding what's happening, particularly with women who are rightfully outraged. I mean, if you're not outraged about what's happening, what are you?
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think Jesus shows us that sense of outrage when he tips over all the tables in the temple and stuff like that. You just, when you read the story, you get the impression that this is something that's been building, right?
Yeah.
This is something that's become so intolerable that finally, out of complete outrage, he just tips over all the tables and things like that. And I think it's a story that helps us realize what is a normal reaction to things building up so much over time, is that there's a point where you just tip over the tables because it's too much and you can't go on the way it is. You have to make some kind of very visible physical statement about it. And what did the disciples say? It was zeal for his father's house, right? It was that zeal for justice, that zeal for an end to oppression that led him to do that.
Yeah. Every time that story comes up, I'm just so thankful that that story is in the Bible.
Me too.
I'm thankful for that, and I'm thankful for the Magnificat, and I'm thankful for the wedding at Cana when Mary told him what to do.
Uh-huh.
I feel like there's so much like, this is going to sound whatever, it's going to sound the way it sounds, but there's so much like flinging out there of gospel verses calling other people to be peaceful and kind.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I just keep thinking, well,
Where's the
what about the
outrage?
tables? What about
Right.
the tables? Who's going to
Right.
flip the tables?
There's this wonderful film about Mary. I think it's called Miriam of Nazareth, right? And in the story of the woman caught in adultery, where everybody's going to throw stones, Mary grabs them and tries to stop them from throwing the stones.
Mm.
Right? I love that image of her because it's so different than the kind of sentimental one we're so often presented with, but this one was more fierce,
Yeah.
more a reaction in defense of the woman. And
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit too in one of our webinars last week about boundaries and balance, that as women, like, we have there's a lot of pressure to be like Mary as our feminine icon of what it means to be a disciple. And the thing that they teach us first and foremost about Mary is that she said yes. And we have a lot of like, I don't know if it's bad theology or shallow theology or just like a period piece theology that characterizes Mary as being meek and mild and lowly and gentle and humble, and it doesn't, it doesn't talk about the Mary who sang a song about turning a whole world order around.
Right. Or who's questioning, right? Or who doesn't have any idea what the rest of the story is going to be. and the courage involved in that. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just all the times too that like she did not just like stand around and wait to see what happened. And that's what I love about the wedding at Cana story, is that she said, son,
Instigator. Yeah.
yeah, go.
Can't let it go down this way.
Right. Like what are you doing? What are you doing?
This is about hospitality.
I mean, who knows? She's the one who led to the beginning of the signs
Yeah.
of his divinity. And if she hadn't been that instigator, then
Yeah.
I mean, the story goes he died 3 years later. So it was like, when are you gonna do this? Now or never. That's not the Mary that we learned growing up, though.
Right.
We
No.
learned a Mary that was compliant and agreeable and said yes.
Right.
And I can't help but think that that's running through a lot of our minds, I think, as each wave of the Me Too movement unfolds, is that I felt like I had to say yes.
Well, as a matter of fact, some scholars, in looking at the Mary Jesus situation, look at this this line, a couple of lines in what the historian Josephus had to say, this Jewish historian. He refers to the fact that Jesus was referred to as illegitimate. And so some scholars propose that perhaps Mary was raped by a Roman soldier or something, right? You start imagining the possibilities of what physically happened, right? Where a whole different story is being put on it in the Gospels that is much more acceptable. But how does that happen that people in the time were referring to Jesus as illegitimate? What was that about? Why did anybody say that? And what was the story behind that? So we don't know what all she may have gone through.
Well, she certainly was treated like that anyway.
Right.
Treated like, and of course, as many people who are victims of sexual assault feel, people basically implicitly or explicitly told her it was her fault.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really hard, the sexism issue. This is a really hard conversation for us to have in church work, because we often are having it, if we're lucky, we're having it in the presence of men who are ordained.
There is
and set apart.
There is a spiritual insight, I think, of importance here. And this is something that St. Hildegard touches on, and that is that, first of all, our tribulations can lead to our richness, of course. You can't tell it at the beginning when it's so hard, right? But later we look back on things and we see where we have been enriched through our experience, however difficult it was. But she points to two different ways to experience tribulations. One is to experience a tribulation or trial or oppression or whatever it might be as a prodigal son. Another way to experience our tribulations, and I would suggest this image to women, is to experience them as a friend of God, right? Because if we get anything out of the Mary story, one of the things the church has always insisted on is her sinlessness. Interesting. And that, to me, directly points to the innocence of women, their sinlessness so
Mhm.
often in the setting of being harmed by abusers. Okay? So we are the new Marys. We are her in that sense. And we experience what we experience as friends of God, not as prodigal sons, not as adulteresses, that kind of thing. So in a funny sort of way, you can take this teaching that the church has long insisted on and say, yeah, well, that applies to us too, right?
Yeah.
Um,
There's a question here related to, do you think the feminine perspective will be influential or present in music and liturgy as long as male priests hold every head leadership position in the church, in the Catholic Church? I have a lot of thoughts about that because I don't think it's right that we have been so limiting of who can be chosen for the head leadership positions in churches. And also, it's another uncomfortable truth, I think, that you and I know that if we suddenly started ordaining women tomorrow, that the problems of clericalism and the shadow sides of that limited or closed off education and access to divine will still be there. They'll still be there. And I know, like, even just amongst women, we create those cliques and exclusivities amongst ourselves. So while I think it's a valuable thing for us to think about what it could look like, just dream. Like there's nothing against. You can be Catholic and you can still dream about what else we can be doing, whether it be
yeah,
working
I
for women.
sometimes think if we were all more capable of singing Hildegard, there's so much feminine imagery in her music, right? In her words. I mean, she calls God Sophia and so on. And so if we could sing our way into some new images of God, it would be very nice. You know, she's kind of hard to sing, but well, I'll speak for myself, Kate, not for you, but because I think you can do it. But
Oh, she's tough. She's tough. Remember that
yeah,
Veriditas?
yeah. I mean, a tiny bit of progress we've made, I think, is that we have come to question clericalism a bit more and to talk to each other about what it is and how we recognize it. And again, another thing to cease to enable, right, is to say, being ordained doesn't mean that you're greater or better or anything like that. We're equals. And when we're not being treated as equals, to be able to point that out. So that's a little bit of progress that we've made, is to be able to say to ourselves, okay, now I think I can recognize it when I see it. I think I know when I'm experiencing it, and I have to confront that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
yeah.
that's a drop in the bucket, of course, but it's a bit.
Yeah, I know the sweeping change of our utopian ideals is not going to happen overnight. I know that. And I see some questions here too about women being voiceless members of the church. I think a good way to think about what it means to have privilege sometimes is when I think about challenging the voices of authority. So as a woman, when I think about challenging men, I play the situation out in my head and I feel like I need to say this, and also I need to be prepared to be ostracized for saying it, be fired for saying it, lose friends for saying it. Like these are all the consequences that come from challenging, I think, the status quo structures of privilege. I mean, are you prepared to lose friends? Are you prepared to lose your job? Are you prepared? And that's another thing that I think is an uncomfortable reality. A lot of it we're seeing play out on social media, is that a lot of people are saying, there seems to be a starker contrast, I guess, between people who say, okay, I know I'm going to lose friends. I know I'm going to lose respect from some people who I previously wanted respect from. And I'm going to say it anyway. And people who are saying, no, I'm not going to say it. That is not how we talk. We will not talk about this. We will prioritize forgiveness and mercy. And that's where I see, and this is unfair, but I think one of the conversations that we're having as a community is what seems like a generational difference in what we're willing to talk about.
Yeah. But everything that you said points to where we started out, is that God's starting point is the truth, right? So to hold back from saying what's true is somewhat dishonest and not aligned with God. I also would say that one of the most helpful things to me on the topic of forgiveness is to understand the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. We might forgive, given that we've all been forgiven, right? We might forgive, but we might not be able to reconcile with something. So, for example, if we were to forgive somebody who was guilty of a great sin, that doesn't mean that we're going to be reconciled with that person who might harm us, right? Or like in domestic abuse, at some point, a spouse might forgive the abuser just to be able to move on and have some peace at heart, but could never be reconciled with that person because it's too dangerous, right? So I think if we can sort those two things out a little bit in our heads, yeah, we can be forgiving in the way that Jesus is forgiving, but Jesus also was fond of saying, "Go and sin no more," and reconciling is only possible when there's truly contrition and reform. And that's very hard to trust in the case of sexual abuse because of the psychological components to it that seem to make it into something the person unsuccessfully fights against. If that makes any sense.
Too, the question, like, it's been very helpful for me to think about the distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation. That's been crucial, especially when you're accused of not being forgiving. And you think, well, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah. Also, I would say that Ignatius teaches us that forgiveness often comes as a grace, right? So if we force ourselves into it, we kind of strong arm our own being and say, I must, and therefore I do, without grace, then probably that's not really genuine, right? So in God's grace of forgiveness, in my experience, tends to come when there's actual contrition on the part of the other. So let's say you're in a loving friendship and your friend does something terribly offensive and you want to forgive that friend, but the friend seems to experience no culpability, no sense of contrition, nothing, right? Well, probably if you forgive prematurely, things will go back, but they won't really go back. They won't really go back into a proper relationship. On the other hand, if your friend really comes to a sense of remorse and contrition and asked for forgiveness, and you simultaneously received the grace to grant that forgiveness, probably relationship will be restored and reconciliation will be possible. But if you strong arm yourself into doing it when the grace is not there, then, it's like Hildegard says, if salvation depended only on human merit, grace wouldn't be grace.
Yeah. And I still think that there's a different nuance to the conversation when you think about forgiveness and reconciliation when it's between two people,
right?
But forgiveness and reconciliation when it's between someone and a community.
Right.
Because I think
or an institution.
The other part of the question that seems to be left out in some threads is mercy for who? Mm-hmm. Kindness for who? Yeah. For the offender or for the ones who have been silenced and pushed aside and harmed repeatedly, even after meager attempts at contrition have been vocalized? Mercy for who? I think
that's God is siding with the victim for sure, right?
Yeah, but I see a lot of people who aren't. I mean, I believe that. I believe God is on the side of the victim. Mm-hmm. And I also see a lot of people who it's hard for everybody, and we're crushed. We are crushed by the truth of what happened. Mm-hmm. And also, I see a lot of people tripping over themselves to restore the integrity of the offender.
What's behind that, do you think? Why not chastise offenders?
I don't know. And that's been a lifelong question, I think, for me. Because you know that I'm a victim of domestic abuse. And I, lots of conversations with my mom, even, since we've all gotten out of that situation. A lot of my questions have been like, why did you stay? Why did you go back? Why did you forgive him? Why did you give him another chance? Right. Why did you leave me in harm's way? And I don't know that there's really going to be an answer to that is restorative for me, other than maybe I shouldn't have done that. Because I think, in my mind, this is part of the way that I've been conditioned. Or maybe because I'm a little bit of a rebel, I've been resistant to, is the emphasis on forgiveness for an abuser, the emphasis on commitment to a promise you made. Those are the types of things that my mom would say,
Right.
That we gotta forgive.
Not terribly satisfying, are they?
No, but I see, a lot of these situations that are playing out right now in the last couple of months are reopening so many old wounds for people who have seen these patterns before.
Right.
Yet they know this way. And it's bringing up a lot of interesting responses. Again, maybe some of it's generational, some of it's gendered for sure. I think some people are seeing a response and saying, well, I did some bad stuff too, and I would want forgiveness. So maybe I should be pushing forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, I would say if the grace arrives to be forgiving, fine. But if the grace has not arrived, one should not muscle oneself into it. And that it is appropriate to chastise offenders in the Christian faith. You see it in Paul's letters all the time. I mean, he's intolerant of some of the offenses and horribleness that goes on. And obviously Jesus too is outraged at times. So it's okay to have outrage. It's okay to protest. It's okay to call a wrong, right? And a wrongdoer, right? And it's okay to put our primary emphasis on siding with the victim just as God does, right? And to try to raise those people up and be in solidarity with them. God wants evil to be discovered, to be out in the open. There's no other way around it, but for light to shine on it. There is no other way to bring evil to an end than to shine a glaring light on it. It just isn't going to happen. If you sweep it under the rug, if you pretend it was less than it was, if you forgive it faster than it actually got revealed, you know, there's a problem there.
Yeah, I think that there's, an instinct in some people to move on. Okay,
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll be better going forward. And that's just not enough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always better to focus on what's in the interest of the common good, more so than an individual. Because the common good will be more likely to take care of our brothers and sisters who have been wounded, versus putting all that emphasis on forgiving the offender. I'm not saying it's wrong to forgive an offender. I'm just saying that when the grace arrives, and to make a distinction between that and reconciling, and in some way smoothing it over. You look at apartheid in South Africa and what it took, right? They spent so much time on bringing out the truth, so much time on that before they ever touched on the idea of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Years went by before they worked on that.
It's just a shattering reality. Like the image in my head as, in both work and in faith life is that we're on a very big boat. Mm-hmm. And in order to turn the boat, we can't turn it too fast or the boat will fall over. Mm-hmm. And I'm usually pretty good at being measured in that way. Mm-hmm. And, being okay with that steady but incremental change. And I just think what's hard for me is with so much of this truth revealed all at once, is that that doesn't feel right. Incremental change doesn't feel right. I just want to.
Well, the boat's in trouble if somebody's trying to kick the side out of it while you're rowing, right? You have to deal with that person who's trying to kick the side out of the boat. Effectively, you have to put a stop to it. Or no matter how well you row and how sincere you are about it, you're doomed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a comment.
It's very hard.
I think this is an important thing to name too. Stan from Baltimore, I believe, says, I minister in a nursing home, and the situations of the past months have opened doors to memories, pains, fears that residents have held inside for years. Their stories are heart-wrenching, but as they walk through their stories, I am witness to the grace they are entering into. I see the truth setting people free every day. There is
fantastic.
Yeah. there is the hopeful side of this coin here is that there is this incredible feeling of just release, like the dam has been opened, and it can, whatever just needs to flow is flowing. I mean, I think about that when we dream about, you know, putting a hymnal together again someday in the future. There's a lot of people who feel like sad that they won't get to put some of their favorite songs in there.
Oh, sure. Uh-huh.
And I feel relief and release and opportunity, possibility.
Yeah, and like you're taking proper responsibility, right? I mean, think of the people who flip open the hymn book and get triggered, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then also, like, totally unrelated, there's this whole, like, there's this wider conversation that's been going on forever and ever and ever about the underrepresentation of people who write music who are also women or people of color. And a lot of that tug of war is like, well, we can't lose these songs, but how are we going to make room for these songs? We just cleared out.
Made some space.
We cleared out a whole lot of space. But I think that's part of the uncomfortable truth, is that the people who hold those spaces, and not to say, I do not discount, I have some of my favorite songs are, you know, were born in the 80s and the 90s too. Some of the songs that got me through some of the darkest parts of my life. Yeah. And I don't think that we should throw them out just because we're tired of them. That's not the belief. That's not the way I practice music ministry. And at the same time, oh my God, we don't know what is waiting for us because we have never made the space to see it and hear it.
Yes. It's similar in the publishing industry right now, is that the acknowledgement that we have so few works by people of color, you know, so few have been, you know, considered to be our next bestseller or whatever. And now that they're making room for it, some other things won't fit on the shelf anymore, right? But it's really great, you know, but it also has challenged publishing models.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what if the model isn't affordable to someone? So for example, nowadays there's a lot of self-publishing and so on. Well, that's accessible to the privileged. And that means what comes out of those publishing houses is very different than a situation where there's greater access, right? So yeah. I get that.
Yeah, that's the uncomfortable truth, I think, too, in that realm, is that, first of all, we haven't really made the space for the people we've claimed to want to make space for. And we haven't made that space a very safe space for those people either. But also, part of that uncomfortable truth is that some people are going to have to let go of some stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to have to let go of your spot in line.
Uh-huh.
You know?
Yeah.
That is hard. That is some of the most betrayal comes from that crowd, I think, that is afraid of what they're going to be losing when things change. And that's a hard thing to reckon with. And I don't mean to sound dismissive about those very real feelings that those people have. I don't mean that at all. But I do think it's one of those uncomfortable truths that we're all sitting in. People are saying, well, wait a minute, what does this mean for me?
Yeah, we share in the primary grades, and then after that, we don't think about sharing so much. We don't think about divvying things up to be more equitable, but it's still necessary.
Well, that kind of leads us too into our wider national conversation right now and what's happening in our political sphere. especially when we talk about immigration and DACA students and the various government programs either to aid immigrants or like ICE, who seems to be hunting people every day. That is another place, like I know a lot of people hate Facebook for this reason, because it seems like it brings out some of the worst, most polarizing comments about this stuff. But when you look at those things, like, that is the truth. People hold firmly to their idea that if immigrants are here, what are they taking from me?
Yeah, it's what's called the zero-sum game, right? Is that if you get something I don't, and so on, and it's kind of a false argument in the sense that in the kind of economy that we have, often more people is better. We thrive more. We have plenty of space. It's it's kind of a false argument that I am going to get less if you are now here too.
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of like, have we forgotten the loaves and fishes story? That in fact, as the people shared, an abundance was created. What if the scriptural model is really the correct one and not the zero-sum game?
Yeah, but I think it's a lot of people, it's a lot of Christians who have used more of a prosperity gospel type of theology, right, that have really confused a lot of people.
Yeah. If I'm successful, that means that I'm good with God. Well, that may not be accurate, right?
Yeah.
Teresa tells us that if we get near God, we should prepare to be enkindled. And we're going to begin to think more radically. And so I sometimes question the prayerfulness and depth of spirituality of people who embrace prosperity gospel or things like that, because it doesn't sound Jesus-like to me. It sounds like some kind of capitalist philosophy that isn't quite how it would work with Jesus, right?
Yeah, there's a comment here about how this conversation has been all over the board, and I just want to name that as that's also the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and injustice is something that catches God's eye, right? Injustice is almost like a prayer itself, begging for God's justice. Injustice is a very strong sense of wrong having been done, right? Or being done. And it calls out to God in and of itself, and God will respond to that. And our real privilege is to get to participate with God in making things better.
Yeah.
And different. And not just going back the way it was. Or to a false normal.
Another comment here from Christina. It says, I have grown to love the element in the Magnificat that acknowledges this redistribution. There was a comment earlier about people see equality as something being taken from them, as opposed to redistribution of resources. So Christina is saying she loves that element in the Magnificat. She says, as a woman of color who also happens to live in the US and has a good job and has plenty, I have to reconcile that I will be the one to walk away empty. God provides for our needs and he's already helped me. I don't need more, but others need their hands filled. I don't need to be raised up. I'm already lifted. And so I can work on humility. That is very mature.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very, that's a generous heart speaking there.
Yeah.
It's what it is to be pure-hearted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as usual, I feel like I could keep talking about all of these uncomfortable.
I know, it feels like we just touched things a little.
Yeah, we just opened the box and let everything out. And
Yeah,
figure it
yeah.
out.
But, you know, so much of the conversation is really dealt with truth, you know, and how important that is, that there's no such thing as freedom without truth. There's no such thing as being genuinely loving without trust in truth. So
Yeah.
we have to have it. We have to have it. And it is uncomfortable. Truth is horribly uncomfortable. And that's why we're uncomfortable right now, is that it's coming out. It's coming out. And truth is the starting point. It's God's not finished. This is, yeah. So just as God has a zeal for revealing the truth, God has a zeal for the discovery of good, right? And that's where we're going too. We're going to discover good.
I do believe that. And I have to like say that over and over to make sure I keep believing that.
Yeah. As Saint Therese says, we trust in God's love and mercy, you know, and we're all called to the holiness, right, of the saints. We're all called to be that. And she says that the saints are the fulcrum that lift the world. So let's be that.
Yeah. Sue has a book coming out next fall, September of 2021, on Hildegard of Bingen. So I think as people have come to know you a little more now and love you, we'll keep watching out for that book when it comes and try to let people know.
Thank you.
When it comes out. But
it's from a press devoted to giving voice to women.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Hopefully we can be that kind of a press too.
Right.
Thank you very much again, Sue.
You're welcome.
For sorting this out. I didn't ugly cry. I thought I was going to cry.
You can do that now.
I probably won't be hanging up. But yeah. Just a note too to everybody, check out our Facebook page and the sessions coming up the rest of this week. Again, we're going to be with Bishop Mark Seitz tomorrow, and we've got a lot of other really exciting topics for us this week. This has been, the last couple of weeks have been some of the most life-giving sessions that we've done together, and have certainly inspired my work, and I hope they have for all of you too. So it's good to be with you all. Thank you again, Sue.
Keep going, all you musicians. We're going to need you so much when we can finally sing again.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
You have created great longing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see you all tomorrow, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.